Welcome to lesson 4.5, all about the media and advertising. In today's lesson, you're going to need to know a little bit about what media bias is, different techniques that advertisers use, and finally the legal requirements that political advertising includes. So to start us off, you should know just generally what the media is. Media includes all kinds of different ways of communicating information. It's the medium, in other words, is the singular of media. And there are lots of different media that are used to convey information and advertise and help people understand the major issues. TV news, newspapers, magazines, even internet news, and that's much more common even now in social media. A lot of media in the United States, when we talk about things like news providers, are often accused of having a pretty liberal bias. A lot of times that's directed at major papers like the New York Times or the Washington Post, MSNBC, and even sometimes CNN. There are some media, though, that lean toward a conservative bias. That commonly includes things like Fox News or the Wall Street Journal. There's a few that are openly, certainly political. For example, The Week is pretty openly liberal, and then the National Review is pretty clearly conservative, and they espouse those things. Ways to be able to kind of figure out how biased are they is to ask those questions that are listed there on the right. What issues does that newspaper or that TV program pay attention to? Who do they interview? Who do they bring on? What jokes do they tell? If we're talking about things that are on, on late night TV, what jokes are they about? Are they mostly at the expense of one party or another? Think about those things before you simply just accept their version of the news. Now, there are a lot of different techniques that are used by advertisers for political campaigns, and these are oftentimes techniques that are used by advertising for a lot of commercial products. So I'll kind of run through some examples or explain what these different terms mean, but it's important that you think about them as you're watching advertising, because the more that you are criticizing inside and what are the ways they're trying to convince you to think about these things, the better consumer of information you are. So for example, name calling, that one's pretty simple. If I simply call someone a good leader, or if I call someone's character into question, that can be a very positive or negative effect. I can also have transfer, and transfer is simply characterizing someone in a positive environment or transferring essentially a positive emotional situation. So if you have a little picture of a puppy and it's soft and it's bouncing around in towels, then all of a sudden, well, you're going to think that the fabric cleaner that cleans that towel is also cuddly and soft. So transferring essentially an emotion of one situation to another, that's often used. Bandwagon is the idea that, hey, 58% of Americans agree that such and such is true, so we think you should support me. So if I'm constantly quoting poll numbers and that kind of thing, I'm appealing to bandwagon. Plain folks is basically using an appeal to the idea that the average Joe supports me. So back in 2008, there was this common refrain of a guy who was known as Joe the Plumber, and he was the everyman. And the John McCain campaign in 2008 continually referred to him and brought him out as an example of someone who was just a plain folk who supported John McCain. Testimonial is related to that, but that's simply the idea of saying, I testify on behalf of this person. I say this person's a good person. So you could have an expert testimonial saying this person helped me get health care. That's an example of testimonial. Card stacking is related to that as well. In card stacking, a propaganda user or a marketer might want to basically play up all the positives and repress all the negatives. So in other words, you're stacking the deck. You're playing all the favorable things, but completely pushing down the things that aren't favorable to your product. Generalities is related to that. It's simply saying, let's focus on change or hope rather than specific policy positions that people get bored of and their eyes glaze over and they're bored. Just think about change. And that's often a criticism of some of these campaigns as well, is that they're too broad, they don't focus on the issues. So that's an issue with generalities. Spin is related to card stacking a little bit in the idea that spin is something bad, it's admitting it, it's taking ownership of it, but it's spinning it around and showing how it's actually a good thing. So spin is often characterized as if the candidate does something that's like a screw up, well, they'll have somebody who will turn out and they'll say, but it wasn't a screw up, it actually was a good thing. So it's a way of trying to spin negative news in a positive way. So all those are different techniques that are used by propaganda and techniques that are used in different advertising. We'll take a look at some of those in class a little bit later, but it is important that you have a general familiarity with what the different terms mean. So in our last topic for today's notes, there's legal requirements. Those legal requirements are that ads that are sponsored by a party, an interest group, a candidate, have to disclose who's sponsoring it and paying for it. So you can see in that picture that it says approved by Barack Obama, paid for by Obama for America. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll know who the group is. There's even a group called Americans for Prosperity. So sometimes they can be pretty vague, but you can actually go and look up who these groups are and who's paying for these things as well. So that's all we have for this time. Hopefully you've taken good notes, and we'll see you next time.